The Statistician-General has just announced a massive drop in the country's GDP in the first 3 months of the year. GDP declined by 3.2% compared to the fourth quarter of 2018. Risenga Maluleke also made a presentation to the ANC Cabinet Lekgotla at the weekend to help the governing party plan better for service delivery. He joins us now in the studio to take a look at those two very important issues. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Now, this story has just come to light over the last couple of hours, and of course it's got all South Africans talking for different reasons. One of them being that many people didn't see this coming. Why do you think this disastrous contraction was worse than expected? What did the analysts miss?
Well, the fact is, we don't get a shocking number ourselves as statisticians in official practice. Every number, we must make it public. There were monthlies that we were releasing from Stats SA. But if you look largely in the area of manufacturing, in mining, as well as in trade, those are the ones that had a major impact on this number, because in terms of manufacturing, it contributed negative 1.1% to the decline. And if you look at manufacturing and mining, they depend heavily on electricity. And we know the load shedding that we have experienced previously, and particularly even in this quarter.
Now, manufacturing and mining, those two sectors have been dismal performers for quite some time now already. Why is the poor confidence levels keeping business from investment? Or is it just the demand that's too low?
Well, you look at exports, for example. In terms of exports, in this quarter alone, they have seen a decline of 26.4%. But not only that, if you look at in relation to your transportation, the parts and accessories in the transportation, they have also suffered heavily. And these are actually highly dependent on electricity. Compare exports and imports. Imports declined by about 5%, 4.5% to be exact. And once you start seeing those kinds of issues, you know that there is something that is a bit complex, and the whole issue of electricity has been a challenge. And if you look in the quarterly labor force survey that we released previously, Marcel, we saw in manufacturing there were 14,000 jobs that were recovered for the same quarter, but they were not in the heavy industry manufacturing. It was in the manufacturing largely of food, which is not heavily dependent on electricity.
Now, to take those practical examples even further, from a brick and mortar point of view, we're just not seeing factories going up, and that speaks to these figures in the manufacturing industry. But it seems that investors are still hesitant to plow money in and then create those jobs that are so desperately needed. And that's despite all of these investment summits, all of these road shows, all of the right noises coming out of the presidency. Is that core to those figures as well?
The current narrative, in terms of investments, job creation and the like, find a country that has seen the decline of manufacturing over a period of time. Look at manufacturing prior to 94 and around 1994. It was sitting as your #1 contributor to nominal GDP, sitting at about 20%, 21%. Today, it's sitting as #4. Now, it has even been overtaken by finance. Finance was #4 in 1994. Finance and business services and real estate was #4. Now it's #1, followed by government, which has always been #2, and followed by trade at #3. And now in manufacturing is at #4. So it's not a matter of that the current narrative is not yielding something. It takes time in the economy, in the space of the economy, for something to happen. Perhaps it's something that as a nation we haven't been watching over years. So the current narrative will not just lift manufacturing off from position #4 to #1.
Now, time is something that especially those of our fellow South Africans who are unemployed, they just don't have as they race to try and put food on the table. One of the other figures coming out of your office just before the elections or around about the time of the elections was the high unemployment rate. Your office put it at 27.6%. Now, if you looked at that figure and people were asking questions then, and now we look at this GDP figure to come out, it all kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Because that unemployment figure came out of the first quarter as well.
Yeah, both of them, the unemployment figure and the GDP are both of the first quarter. The unemployment didn't come before elections. It came just after.
Just after.
Yeah. Now, what is happening is that if you look at the unemployment rate, it has been steadily rising. In the last decade, it has come out of in the early 20s of a percent, and now it's steadily rising, sitting at 27.6%. And when you look at it, it's not only that, you also, and that's the official definition, you also have about 3 million South Africans who are your discouraged work seeker.
Who've given up on looking for work.
Yeah. And there are so many reasons, but we pick those people largely in the rural areas. And if you look at the way the spatial setting of South Africa is, the whole issue of the apartheid spatial framework is still very, very prevalent because people have to move long and travel long distances to places where they can get employment, Marcel. That's why if you look at the proliferation of the emergence of informal settlements nearer to places of work, is actually booming than ever in your urban provinces. And if you look at Gauteng, for example, you look at the Western Cape, you look at the Northwest where you have a lot of mines emerging. So now, as you look at that, when you take the 6.2 million persons plus the 3 million discouraged work seeker, plus another million of persons who didn't look for employment, but for other reasons other than being discouraged, you have about 9.9 million people who account for the 38% of the expanded unemployment rate beyond the 27.6%.
Now, those issues almost seem insurmountable. It's a mountain that the country needs to climb. And you did a presentation to the ANC Cabinet Lekgotla just this past weekend. Would these latest GDP figures have factored into the picture that you painted for them? And do you get the sense that those that you did that presentation for are in these very important government departments? Do you get the sense that they realize that time is of the essence to turn this ship around?
Firstly, the presentation was not to the ANC Cabinet Lekgotla. It's the ANC is not cabinet.
Yes,
it was
apologies.
The ANC NEC.
Okay.
Yeah. At some stage, I guess government will have
indeed
its own Lekgotla.
Yes.
But the second issue is that the GDP figures were not made available because they were not yet released. There's no precise in statistical law in South Africa. So politicians, whether they come from the governing party or from opposition, or even government or government ministers, even the minister that I report to, doesn't have access to GDP figures until they are released. They are released equally to members of the public in as much as they are released to policymakers and the industry. So the GDP figures didn't form part of that presentation.
But the picture that you would have painted for them wouldn't have been far rosier than the one we're sitting with this afternoon.
Well, we were talking about the first quarter of the last quarter of 2018, which was a positive growth, both on the issue of quarter on quarter, and the year on year was also a positive growth, sitting at 0.8 as of 2018. Of course, the unemployment figures were already out, but all the other issues in relation to unemployment, in relation to the GDP over a period of time which we have been measuring, in relation to service delivery, we were able to share those with them. The second issue is as to whether firstly, maybe let me dispel this myth that the presentation to the ANC NEC is not a privilege of the ANC. We present to any political party, and we present to churches, to student leadership, anywhere. So anyone who, because status say is not a function of government. It's a public good that must be accessed by everyone.
But you're sitting on information that can be very worthwhile to a government that really needs to get the economy's wheels turning again.
Certainly, no doubt about that. And we have made a presentation, and it's incumbent upon those who receive the information, being in the policy space, being in government or in the leadership, even in the industry, to digest them further in the way they formulate policies, in the way they plan, even monitor and evaluate their policies and programs going forward.
Perhaps you just need to send them an email with these latest statistics based on the presentation you gave them, just so that they have the very latest figures, as we all have this afternoon. But thank you so much for your time. The Statistician-General, Risenga Maluleke, thank you so much for your insight.
Thank you, Marcel.
Thank you for your insight this afternoon.